Hi, everybody. My name is Greg Katz, and welcome to Tuesday's edition of WeAreSC.com's Inside the Trojans Huddle, where we tell it like it is. Friends, Inside the Trojans Huddle is a game-like panel discussion that is posted on Tuesdays in the off-season and twice during the regular season. Huddle features WeAreSC columnists, staff writers, and historians. We start first with the pregame show, where we introduce our panel members for this edition of Inside the Trojans Huddle, and then give you the latest USC Trojans football news. Now let's meet Tuesday's panelists. A WeAreSC columnist who writes WeAreSC.com's The Monday Morass, Yay or Nay, and Sunday Takeaways. In addition to regular season football and basketball reports, he also hosts his own podcast show entitled Locked On USC, Mark Kulkin. A former William Jewell College defensive back and WeAreSC columnist who writes the popular WeAreSC.com column Musings with Arledge, and his own weekly WeAreSC.com video show, Musings with Arledge Solo Edition, and is a graduate of the USC Law School, Chris Arledge. And finally, a weekly WeAreSC columnist who writes Fridays the Obvious and Not So Obvious, IMHO Sunday, and is an active member of the Football Writers Association of America, your moderator and producer of Inside the Trojans Huddle, Greg Katz. Before we kick off this Tuesday's edition of Inside the Trojans Huddle, here's a recap of USC football news. This past weekend, the Trojans entertained their largest gathering of class of 2024 visitors on their official visits. The results netted them a big-time commitment from local Bellflower St. John Bosco four-star corner Marcellus Williams. Made the announcement on Father's Day. He is the younger brother of USC's defensive back Max Williams. Williams was offered by Oklahoma and UCLA, among others. It should be noted that he is the highest-ranked commit thus far in this class. And it also should be noted that those recruits were given uniforms on this weekend's visit with a Big Ten logo on the upper right front of the jersey. Last week, the Trojans also received a class of 2024 commitment from four-star tight end Walter Matthews from Hiram, Georgia. Matthews, 6'7", 259, picked the Trojans over Florida Gators, but also had offers from Ohio State, Michigan, and Florida State. And according to WeAreSC.com recruiting guru Scott Schrader, as many as 7 recruits this past weekend could commit in the near future. Last week, defensive back Latrell McCutcheon entered the transfer portal. And on a staffing note on Monday, former South Carolina linebacker Bryson Allen Williams joined Lincoln Riley's staff as the defensive quality control coach. Last season, Allen Williams was a quality control member of the North Carolina Tar Heels under Mac Brown. And USC President Carol Folt announced near the end of last week that the USC football program will receive a new performance center, which will include 3 levels dedicated to team operations, as well as a second full-length football field locker room, team auditorium, and meeting room. More on the big story in the first quarter of the huddle. And a reminder that the recruiting division of WeAreSC.com, headed by Scott Schrader and assisted by Marshall Levinson, can be read daily during the week on our premium subscriber storyboard. And don't forget to watch this Friday's WeAreSC.com video recruiting roundup show with hosts Dylan Brazier and Scott Schrader. Friends, WeAreSC's Inside the Trojans Huddle greatly appreciates your viewer and listenership. We encourage those of you watching on sites like YouTube to click on the red subscriber and like buttons. It's greatly valued and it's free. You can also listen to Inside the Trojans Huddle on many available podcast sites. And a reminder, WeAreSC.com is offering a subscription special. You can get all the WeAreSC premium content for 3 months for just $1 or $49.99 for 1 year. All right, with that in mind, let's get rolling here. Kicking off the first half, panel, as mentioned in the opening, USC President Carol Folt announced that the USC football program is getting a new building all for itself. Folt is referring to the new addition as a performance center. In short, the new performance center includes a full-length football field, leads to the performance center, new locker room, multiple player lounges, a recovery hub, nutritional support, sports science services, a weight room, a training room, and an equipment room. In addition, the new performance center will also feature a team auditorium, position meeting rooms, recruiting areas, staff offices, and for flexible space for growth. And let's not leave out a 3 levels building dedicated to team operations, as well as a rooftop hospitality deck and a player lounge. No completion date has been announced for the football center, nor has any official name be given to it other than the Football Performance Center. So, panel, your overall thoughts on the new Performance Center. Our leadoff hitter, as always, Mark Kulkin. What are your thoughts on this new project?
In a nutshell, Greg, it's a game changer. And I'm going to tell you why. People forget that USC won 11 national championships, turned out, 7 Heisman Trophy winners before the McKay Center was even erected. And the football program was competing against, obviously the SEC and other programs that love to invest in the bells and whistles. So all of a sudden now USC has stepped into we'll call it the 21st century, and they are giving themselves another unfair advantage. They're going to be on equal footing with programs that they've been recruiting against, the Alabamas, the Georgias, the LSUs, the Clemson's, Ohio States of the world, and giving their football program, the same types of, as I mentioned, bells and whistles, mood lights, locker rooms that, you have your own pod. It's like giving an 18-year-old their first car as a Ferrari and saying, all right, we're going to do everything else for you to help you reach your goals. And now we're going to give you the nicest toy so you can use it and take advantage of what we're going to provide to you. So again, USC used to do it the hard way. Now they're just getting smarter. I don't know how this can be perceived in any way but a positive. And if anybody has a negative, I'm still waiting to hear one. Spoken to a lot of people about this, and people are just like, wow. I was out there at the OT7 on Sunday, on Father's Day. People are just like, USC is going to have other programs are going to have a really tough time recruiting against USC now. You bring this in, you bring in NIL, the transfer portal. It's kind of, game over almost.
Mark, let me ask you this question. Were you surprised that they didn't name a completion date?
No. Look how long it's taken them to get to here. The fact that they actually have drawings, I'm not even sure they have a start date. All we know is it's going to happen. So we'll find out. I'm not surprised. I'm willing to take baby steps. They made the announcement. This was obviously a big part of bringing Lincoln Riley over. And so they had to kind of prove it. Last week when Carol Folt announced it, it was show and tell. And everybody got to go ooh and ah.
Chris Arledge, did you go ooh and ah? Do you think the Performance Center is an absolute game changer, as Lincoln Riley said it was in his perspective? Is it needed? What's your overall thoughts?
Well, Lincoln Riley obviously thinks it's very important. This is something that he insisted upon in taking the job, and he's clearly excited about it. I don't know that you have to be equal to the other programs with their great facilities in order to be successful, right? Pete Carroll wasn't. It's just that that's something you have to overcome. And if other programs have the bells and whistles, then that doesn't only catch recruits' eyes, but it also seems to suggest that they're more serious about football than USC is. And so, look, if you can take away as many of those disadvantages as possible, then it puts you in a strong position to recruit, top 3 classes every year, which is obviously what Lincoln Riley wants to do. So yeah, this is exciting news. It's only going to be good for the program, and I think Mark is right. It's going to make it very difficult for other programs to compete against USC. There was a time not too long ago when a program like Oregon, which can't actually sell, tradition or trophies or elite education, at least had a really fancy building, and that would impress people. If USC has an equally fancy building, then I guess they're left bragging about their time on the CW. But you can see how that would make it a lot more difficult for them to compete with USC. And by the way, since everybody's wondering, yes, I am sitting in a car. I'm sitting in a rental car in a parking lot because I had a meeting finish and I didn't have time to get somewhere else. So I apologize for doing this from a rental car, but I had no choice.
Well, it just shows you how.
This is not a fantastic new facility. This is the opposite of what USC is doing.
But it should be noted, it shows how much you care about USC football and the huddle, and we greatly appreciate that. Or you just want to experience what Lincoln Riley has done. Like last year, he answered some questions, I believe, when he was driving to work or his limousine driver or whatever. So how does it feel to be in that position, sitting in a car in Newport Beach? Do you feel like Lincoln Riley?
I don't feel like Lincoln Riley. And by the way, I was trying a case last year, and we had a witness who had to appear by Zoom from out of town. And the witness calls in, and he's trying to testify while he's still driving his car. He didn't even pull over the side of the road. He's driving and talking to us until the judge told him, sir, I need you to pull over and stop doing that. It's unsafe. Oh, okay, judge. So at least I'm not doing that. I am stationary.
Well, how was the yacht cruise, Chris? I said, how was the yacht cruise, Chris? Since you're hanging out there in Newport.
Did Chris freeze up on us? No, he's okay. Are you okay there, Chris?
I think so. I'm back.
Okay, well, we'll keep rolling because we don't want to end up having an issue. So let me ask you this on this topic. What becomes of the John McKay Center now? I mean, we don't know when it's going to start, this new project, when it's going to end. I think it's obviously you have to. I think when you get down to it, it's a great facility. I'd like to see more artist stuff about what's inside of it. I'm sure it'll be awesome. My question, of course, is what about the McKay Center? Is it how are they going to use it? How does it affect Heritage Hall? Mark, you're around there all the time. What's going to happen? What's your understanding about? You move up out of this, all the football stuff out of there and over to this new building. What takes its place inside the McKay Center? Anybody heard anything?
No, and I actually asked a couple of people. I'm waiting to hear back from them, but it is interesting because right next door to it, is the dining hall, which is, pretty top notch. So I don't know if they would just take that out, other than maybe just make it more available to the entire student population as opposed to just student athletes. And the Lions Center is still there, but it's, I would call it small, maybe antiquated is more useful. But it's still a top-notch facility. You've got meeting rooms, an auditorium. It's a learning center, with computers and the tutors. So there's a lot going on there. I don't think they would just rip it out. They invested, a lot of money in it. 12 years ago? It would seem like a waste to. I'm not sure what they would do with it. I don't know. Great question.
I assume that's going to become an upgrade for some of the other sports, right?
Yeah, track and field uses.
That would be the most reasonable thing.
Yeah.
No.
Football players aren't going to have to wait to get on the treadmill anymore. How's that?
Well, it's a question it first hit me is because we remember the ballyhoo for it. I remember the first time I toured it, the times I've been in there. I'm sure that they could still use the auditorium there for press meetings, introductions to the athletic department, so on and so forth. But knowing how elaborate it is on that third floor, I think it's the third floor or second floor. I don't know how they're categorizing it. It seemed like there was a lot of space devoted to football, and it'll be very interesting to see how it goes.
Maybe the NIL offices over there.
Okay, I mean that's a good point actually. We have to take into consideration NIL and how they're going to do it. I think what caught my eye with the announcement of the new football thing is they said a new recruiting center. I'm kind of fascinated by what that's going to entail. I think it's really intriguing to see what they're doing. I think it's obviously something they can sell, but as far as the John McKay Center, it'll be interesting to see how they transition that. We have a lot of questions at the end of the show. A lot of active listeners wanted questions, so we're going to kind of cut the time short here on the first half, but we're going to go to the second half. So, or excuse me, quick hitters of halftime. So guys, you're going to fill in the blank for me. We're kind of looking towards the Big Ten, and we're going to have like a little exit in the future about Pac-12 schools and what we remember. But considering now that we're putting Big Ten patches on jerseys for recruits coming in, because that's what they're going to be playing in. So kind of fill in the blank for me. I'll start off, since obviously we have a 3-panel today. Eric is on assignment. When I think of Ohio State football, I think of fill in the blank. I'll start it off. I think of physical football. I think of the horseshoe having been there. And Woody Hayes, that I cannot stop and think of the times that remembering the great battles of the 70s between John McKay and Woody Hayes, and how Woody Hayes was nationally and the disgrace he was when he punched the player from Clemson on the sideline. That's my thoughts on Ohio State. Mark, when you think of Ohio State football, what do you think of?
Yeah, I mean, everything you said, it's just a passionate place for football. The stickers on their helmets, the end of the season, rivalry game against Michigan. Knowing that Ohio State football, with growing up watching Woody Hayes and the teams that followed after him, as you mentioned, just the physicality. Ohio State thinks of football and then anything else after that. It's literally that order. And family sometimes comes second.
All right, Chris, when you think of Ohio State football, what do you think of?
Yeah, a lot of the same things. I think of the helmet stickers. That's so distinctive to Ohio State. You don't see that at a lot of programs, at least not in that way. And I think of the horseshoe because, like you, I've been there, and it's an unbelievable place to watch a football game. And that OHIO thing they do, that like they do all the time. Somebody just screams it out, and then a bunch of people do it. It's really annoying. Teams always complain about the USC band, and they're always playing they're always playing the same song over and over again. I start to understand their complaint at least a little bit after having experienced the Ohio State fans do that OHIO thing, which is just awful. I mean, the first couple of times it was kind of cool. After about 600 times, less cool. That's what I think about.
All right. Well, I think let's move on. Panel, when I think of Michigan football, what do you think of? I'll start off on this one. I think of, again, physical football, the uniforms, the helmet, the stripes on the top of the helmet. And I think of the fight song, Hail to the Victors, and the precision of the Michigan marching band, which is in concert also with the Ohio State marching band, I might add. But those are the things that are iconic to me. What about you, Mark?
Yeah, I remember all the USC Rose Bowl victories over Michigan. As you mentioned, they wear the modern day helmet, just they have the wrong colors. I love watching Ohio State Michigan play. For me, that every Saturday growing up, I knew that was going to be on at 9 o'clock in the morning, and it was going to lead up to a USC versus UCLA rivalry game, or USC Notre Dame, typically later in the year. Michigan football, again, it's the big house. It's 100,000 people. That, first of all, Ann Arbor doesn't have 100,000 people. So how they are able to get that many people there every single college football game, no matter how good or bad they are, is pretty neat. And that's something that Michigan, as you mentioned, they can hold that over a lot of other programs. They've got that fan base that just appreciates Michigan football. And Hail to the Victor, I mean, that's one of the most iconic fight songs that's out there.
So let me ask you a follow-up question, because you did bring it up. Do you foresee in the probably near future, when you consider it's only a year away, that on the same Saturday at the end of the season that we will see Ohio State and Michigan, at least out here at the 9 o'clock hour, 12 o'clock back there? That's the tradition. Do you think we'll again see the SC-UCLA game to follow that rivalry, since it's going to be a Big Ten game? or at least be on the same day. If it's not immediately following, maybe the night game on the same day. What do you think will happen?
If I'm in charge of one of the TV networks that gets to do this, yeah, it's probably way up there on my list of let's make this happen. Check it off. Absolutely. I mean, it's advertisers are going to be lining up to sell their product for those games.
All right, Chris, Michigan football, your thoughts. What do you think of?
Yeah, I mean, you guys have hit the points already. Michigan and Notre Dame are obviously rivals in football, but they're also rivals when it comes to both helmets and fight songs. I think Notre Dame and Michigan are competing for the most iconic helmet. They're competing for the most iconic fight song. And whenever I think of Michigan football, I think of those two things. I also think of the Michigan that I remember growing up, Bo Schembechler's Michigan. Bo with the power football and grumpy and just the way they played that Midwestern brand of football. That style of football has sort of gone away over the last decade or so, including in places like Michigan. But I will always associate that brand of football with Michigan and that contrast between the reserved, kind of grumpy, physical, blue-collar Michigan teams and the flashy, exciting USC teams. It always made for a great contrast.
Yeah, it really did. One year back in 1969, I was at East LA College, and that's where many times the Big Ten would work out in preparation for the Rose Bowl. And I remember going and seeing, in those days, Michigan had players like tight end Jim Mandich, Billy Taylor at running back. And, when I saw them up close, their helmets off, they let me in to see it. It was amazing how mature looking the players from the Midwest look, because you mentioned flashy. How Beach Boy look in some ways. That's kind of an unfair characteristic of Southern California, the lifestyle and everything. But there was definitely a different look to Michigan players. They looked like the 20-year-olds looked like 30-year-olds, and I was always amazed how SC could literally hit with them and out hit them in a Rose Bowl game. All right, so finally we're going to end halftime with this. When I think of Penn State football, I think of. Now, I know this is unfair, and I hope our Penn State listeners, who we hope will return and watch the show and continue on when we're officially part of the Big Ten. But I can't help but think of the downfall of Joe Paterno, that it ended the way it did in such a disgrace. Believe me, if anybody knows about turmoil in a department, it's SC fans. But the truth of the matter is, I remember the year he came out here the first time, how cantankerous he was, and it seemed like he was just annoyed at everything and everybody. And I kind of expected this quote Saint Joe image, and it wasn't like that. I remember, I think it was at Disneyland, and it was like kind of like, wow, this is really Joe Paterno. But I understand it was the end of his career, and I think they actually wanted to move on. But Mark, what do you think of when you think of Penn State football?
Obviously, the whiteout. Again, it's an iconic uniform, just white helmet, white shirt, white pants, black shoes. It's tradition. You mentioned the downfall of Joe Pa and everything that, we don't need to go in what happened behind the scenes, but there is a cult-like atmosphere around folks who follow that football program. And again, it's in the middle of nowhere. And every single game to see, I don't know where they're coming from, but over 100,000 fans fitting into that stadium every single game. You just have to kind of tip your hat to that. And the style of football that I remember Penn State, it was, just 3 yards and a cloud of dust, and then go play defense. And they would go up against the flashy teams like the Miamis that we remember in the early days with Jimmy Johnson. Talk about a contrasting style. That's what I remember, is the Penn State style versus the Miami style, and how Penn State style just kept doing what it did and winning.
Yeah, I think you make a good point. I think that Penn State football, to me, you always there's always like, what would happen if SC played Penn State? What would happen? Because there was a mystique to me about Penn State football, because in those days they were an independent. And boy, I'll tell you, I remember when they played in the Fiesta Bowl against Marcus Allen and that team. And quite frankly, they just destroyed SC physically. It was like jaw-dropping to see that type of football imposed on USC. And I kind of gained a new respect for Penn State, because in those days when they were independent, they didn't always play the toughest schools in the schedule, shall we say. Chris, what do you think about Penn State football? What do you think?
I think about what everybody thinks about. You can't think about Penn State football without thinking about Joe Paterno. I don't know that there's another program that closely identified with a single individual, right? I mean, maybe Florida State, maybe, but all of the other blue blood programs have had success under more than one coach in various eras. You're talking about a program that was built by Joe Paterno, and for the better part of half a century, ruled it with an iron fist, for better or for worse. And you're right. And you're right that those Paterno teams. I remember the Marcus Allen game. I was very young, but I remember that one. The one that I really remember, though, and I think Mark alluded to it, was that national title game against Vinny Testaverde's Miami team. I think it was '86.
Yeah.
I was a kid, and I don't know what the point spread was for that game, but I remember thinking that there's no way in the world Penn State can play with these guys. Just no way in the world. And then what you see is that they're pressuring Testaverde, they're shutting down the run, they're picking him off over and over and over again. And I mean, Joe Paterno, for all his faults, which are out there for the whole world at this point, that guy was a heck of a football coach when he was in his prime. I mean, those guys were tough, and they were disciplined, and they would show up and hit you in the mouth. And even if you were a lot more talented than they were going to bring it to you. And so that's what I remember. They played like their uniforms, plain and boring sometimes, but geez, so effective.
It's funny because you made me, when you were saying there, Chris, it made me think about a friend that I had known for a long, long time, their family, Jesse Gomez, who was a snapper center on USC's team back in the mid 90s. And I remember the SC went to play in Happy Valley, and he got his leg broken. And I talked to him later afterwards, and he said, you know what, playing at Penn State in that crowd, in that stadium, he says, they were absolutely vicious. The players, not alone the crowd. He said they really played a style of football that we weren't ready for. He goes, and look at me, I ended up with a broken leg. So that shows you Penn State football. And I think we mentioned this in a previous show. I will not be shocked at all if next season or in 2024, it's a whiteout game for USC. It just seems like it's like just staring me in the face. And that in itself would be worth covering the game. No matter how long the drive is from Harrisburg to Happy Valley. So interesting takes, guys. Well done. We'll continue with some of these questions with the Big Ten, some of the other schools, and then we'll do an exit interview later. Kind of thoughts on the Pac-12 and leaving the schools. But let's get to the second half. And I think this is a quality second half here because it's about recruiting. Panel, the Trojans have finally cracked the top 10. They're number 9 at last count with the Marcellus Williams commitment. How far away are the Trojans from having a top 5 recruiting class? And what do they need to get inside the top 5? Chris, your overall thoughts on, are we going to have a top 5 class?
Yeah, I think probably. It certainly appears as if Lincoln Riley and his staff, including Annie Henson, are really on top of things. Not just because they're spending a lot of money, which clearly they are, but also because they figured out how to persuade parents and players, and they have USC has a lot to offer, and they are doing a great job of getting that information across in ways that's impactful. So they're not going to get everybody, but I think they're going to get a lot of people. And at this point, it would be a surprise to me if USC doesn't finish in the top 5. And if they don't, they'll probably be just outside of that. And that combined with Lincoln Riley's aptitude when it comes to pulling players out of the transfer portal means that USC will continue to rebuild their roster to make it look like a top 5 program. And he's doing it in very quick order.
I'm looking at our stories on WeAreSC.com, and I'm talking with friends, and it seems to me, and we'll get, I think, a little clear definition from Mark here in a moment. It seems to me that it's not if, but when a lot of these guys are going to announce. Just reading their quotes, one of the things I've always learned over the years is players come out with some really, at the time they say it, very sincere quotes, how they're blown away by this and that and the academics and everything that goes along with having a wonderful recruiting trip. But it seems to me, I felt this way last year, I feel this way this year, that there's really meat on the bone here. The quotes that I'm saying, I'm hearing grandma thinks that this is basically where I should be going to school. Hearing the comments. I just have a question. I think in the NCAA, schools are now allowed to, on official visits, bring parents. Am I accurate on that? Does SC pay for parents to come out here if they're traveling?
On official visits?
Yeah.
Pretty sure.
Yeah, I think so. I think that was a change.
Yeah.
And obviously, to me, there's so many of them that are now coming that I think I did remember. I think that they were doing that, but I wasn't 100%.
University, if not the university itself, the collectives are. I mean, it's.
Yeah, I think that's right. And Mark points out the collectives. Here's the thing. One of the downsides to trying to recruit out of state is that, especially with families that don't have a ton of money, you're trying to convince mom to let junior go play somewhere where they're not going to be able to see him play in person. Maybe they get out there once a year. Those days are gone, right? If the family wants to fly out to USC to watch football games, they're going to be able to do that, which I think it changes things dramatically. Not always in SC's favor, right? Because other programs can do that too. And so I think it makes it harder to build a fence around your school. You're sort of seeing that with Georgia now, right? I mean, Georgia's losing good football players to other programs, despite the fact that they're on top of the world. And so USC is going to do the same. I think it's going to make all the major powers more national recruiters. In the way that programs like Notre Dame have always been, but Texas, USC, the Florida schools, it was always 90% hometown kids. I don't think it's going to be that way anymore, partly because of this NIL stuff.
Let's transition over to you, Mark. Some comments. I had a chance to watch your podcast show, the Monday one.
I thought this question sounded familiar.
Well, I try to be equal.
No, because it's perfect. That's a great way. That's a great segue for me to answer because.
Well, yeah, because now you owe me one, but that's fine. But anyway, tell us what you know and your thoughts on this.
Yeah, USC is actually, they have if we're using On3's data recruiting database, they have the number 9 class right now. The difference between 9, 8, 7, and 6 is. Literally, you can't fit the difference between my finger and forethumb. It's less than a percentage point. So all USC needs to do is just continue to add players. And they are going to be in the top 5, which is a spot that Michigan currently holds. It's a matter of time. And knowing that the players or the recruits that USC is in play for, if just 2 or 3 of those decide to pop the cork and say USC is where I'm going to go, they're inside the top 5. It's not like you said, Greg, it's not a matter of if, it's now really a matter of when. is USC going to be a top 5 team by the end of June as far as the recruiting rankings are concerned? And
I
if
think-
they're not,
Go ahead, Mark. I'm sorry.
oh, that's
Go-
okay. You know, I kind of ended my segment last on the show yesterday that if USC doesn't finish with the top 5 class, something went wrong, and that usually means they reneged on a lot of things and probably had a really bad season.
Well,
Again,
I think a recruit that I'm looking at strongly, and I think this is some again to pimp your show a bit, was you mentioned that SC and was down to SC and Clemson for Mike Matthews, the wide receiver out of Georgia. You know, if that does happen, that SC gets Mike Matthews, to me, he's such a big name in the recruiting world. He's obviously a 5-star. SC doesn't have a 5-star yet, but I think they'll have a 5-star after the All-Star games are played and people see the workouts. You'll see some stars moving around, and I think SC will have more than one 5-star when the dust is settled. But if they get like Mike Matthews, and it does, you know, I think according to you, correct me if I'm wrong, it's neck and neck with Clemson.
Yeah.
If SC can pull him out of Georgia to come to the West Coast, to me, I already get the sense, I wrote about this already, that the Southeast Conference is starting to raise eyebrows again concerned about USC. And it's possible, in my opinion, that Lincoln Riley, if he has the haul that he looks like he's going to haul, not only from Texas, and we'll get into some of this in a second, he could actually be a bigger threat than Pete Carroll ever was in the long term, because I think Lincoln Riley will be at SC for a while. But boy, I tell you, if I'm in Georgia, you don't want to sit there at this point in time if Matthews goes to SC and say, well, that was an anomaly, because there's other players from Georgia that are coming to SC. And I think someone else pointed out, even if a player doesn't come to SC out of Georgia, they go back saying that was a hell of a trip. Those guys are awesome. And who knows, with the transfer portal, they could still get some of these players to return to SC as players on the second time around. So let me transition to any predictions on uncommitted players you think will commit at the end of the month. Chris, is any name stick out to you that you think might make a commitment that's a big-time player by the end of the month?
Well, I mean, I think USC is going to have quite a few big-time players, but it looks more and more like Taylor Tatum is almost certain to pick USC, the running back out of Texas, who's, you know, the #1 back in the country, I think, according to most services, which is pretty exciting. I mean, USC needs to recruit Texas well. They have a lot of ties there. There are a ton of good football players in Texas, and it's a short trip. I know it's a short trip because I do it all the time for work. It's just not that bad to fly.
All right, I think we're having a little freeze there with Chris. Hopefully he gets back on the line here. But to amplify what Chris was saying, you know, SC is recruiting a lot of players and getting success out of Texas. And it's starting, let's say I'm at Oklahoma, I start saying to myself, my God, he's turning Texas, Oklahoma into now USC, Texas. And it's like the Lincoln Riley transition to USC didn't change a thing as far as Texas recruits are. They're just looking at Lincoln Riley and say, oh, he's not at Oklahoma. Okay, I'm going to look at USC. So I'm going to also predict that that the running back is going to make the commitment to USC. I think it's you know, when you look at where Nathaniel I think it's Parker is looking at TCU or SMU. You know, I think that makes a kind of a idea that it might happen. Mark, who do you think is going to be the next one?
I'm not going to mention name. I just think it'll probably be another defensive player. But and to your point though about you know, the whole Mike Matthews being a 5-star, I don't think it makes a difference one way or another. As much as USC and would love to have Mike Matthews, if you look at, you know, for all the stargazers, if you look at USC's score rating, they literally they actually have the #6 class as far as, you know, player ranking is concerned. So again, that's what I always like to kind of gauge is the program that's recruiting the player and the impact that player would have on the program. I don't care if it's a 3-star or a 5-star. If USC, Georgia, Alabama, and Clemson wants you, does it really matter if you're a 4-star or a 5-star? Of course not. You're highly wanted. USC is going to be just fine. They can add one player and they are going to jump 2 teams. So you add a Taylor Tatum, you add a Anthony Smith, or a Draylon Miller, or a Jason Zandamela, the offensive lineman. There's a lot of play out there right now. You have Marquise Gallegos, another safety defensive back prospect. USC is going to be just fine by the end of the month. Again, there's a lot of names out there.
Let's welcome back Chris. Nice to see you're back with us. Can you talk?
Sorry, guys. Yeah, can you hear me?
I know you want to drive through, Whataburger or whatever it's called, but
In and Out. I'm in Newport Beach. It's called In and Out. And here's the thing: this is a show with high production values, and so sometimes this sort of thing will happen. When I got cut off, I kept talking for about 20 seconds, and I said probably the best stuff I've ever said on any of our episodes, and you missed it. But I don't repeat myself, so I'm not going to say it for you now. But thank you for welcoming me back, Greg.
It's an honor and a pleasure, believe me. I am going to say, since Mark brought it up, since he says he can't mention a defensive player's name, I'm going to mention.
I wouldn't mention anybody specifically who will.
Well, I'll mention specifically because I don't have a problem with it. I know that you have sources and stuff that I understand, but I could be wrong. So, you don't have to comment one way or the other. I think if you're looking at a defensive player, I would think Anthony Smith would be the one that would recruit, especially because of his grandmother saying, she's all in love with it. He lives, I guess, apparently with his grandmother, and it just seemed like a kind of a neat story. And of course, if that is true, if that's who I'm thinking that without you having to say it, is the player, I'll take full responsibility. And I think that means that the wide receiver is going to join him from Texas at some point in time, Draylon there. So let's kind of finish this segment up so we can get to some questions here. Panel, do you expect from here on out the signing for some players that SC, how should I put this? Expect from here on out to the signing date, players are going to flip from here to signing date for USC. In other words, let's just say, as an example, I don't think it's going to happen, but let's say that Dylan Riola decides, okay, I'm going to flip from Georgia to USC. I mean, that's a fantasy world, and I did it because I knew it'd bring a smile to Kulkin's face, which is, a real challenge for me. But on the same token, do you expect some of these players that's committed SC to decommit from USC before we get to December signing period? Chris, what do you think? Are we going to see flips on both sides before December? You got to unmute. We can't hear you, Chris.
Sorry, guys. I'm failing the team today.
Well, I thought you were doing an Eric McKinney impression, but that's okay. We'll move on.
Like every quarterback, you forget the last play and you go on.
That's right.
That's right. Short memory. Yeah. So I think it will happen because it happens every year, right? And a lot of times fans get freaked out when somebody flips and a USC commit flips and leaves. The truth is, most of the time when that happens, it's because the coaching staff wanted it to happen. And so those aren't scary. I think it probably will happen. I'm not going to offer any names, but that's usual practice. But USC has a lot to sell. And as Lincoln Riley has pointed out, unlike last year when they were selling potential or track record at another school, this year they're selling that we've already started the turnaround and we're most of the way there. You can come join us. And it's a pretty effective pitch. So yeah, I mean, USC will probably flip some people and they're going to end up with a loaded class. I don't think there's any question about it. Not Raiola. I don't think that's going to happen, but they're going to end up with a loaded class.
Yeah, I think there'll be some flips, but when we're at this stage of the game, I think Taylor Moss, the number one tailback or running back, as we say now, in the country, I think he'll stick. I think Ty Anthony Smith, who I mentioned earlier from the eastern part of Texas, I think he'll stick. But we know from past practice that there'll always be some changes, probably coaching induced for the most part. But it's always interesting to me to see if SC all of a sudden gets a flip from a player who just said, well, thanks, you were great, SC, but I think I'm going to go here. I'm always interested to see if the guy's going to flip back. So it'll be interesting. Mark, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think it's going to happen. Look, I'm going to use Latrell McCutcheon as my example. It gets to a point where certain players, they start looking at the roster and saying, you know what, I'm all about competition, but I'm not about, I had my own self-realization that I'm not good enough for that room. And I want to play. And I might be able to be good enough for that room in a couple of years. Let me go play somewhere else and prove it. So yeah, I think it'll happen just because the mindset of these young men, it starts playing with them. They might feel good now today, but we brought up the name Mike Matthews. If you're a receiver that's committed or intends to commit, are you going to be intimidated now? Because we know that there's politics at play with the whole star rankings, and especially if you're recruiting across the country. Stuff starts playing around in the locker room, at least inside the player's head. So yeah, I think it could happen potentially.
Mark, I want to ask you a question. It's always intriguing to me. We'll use Mike Matthews as an example. Mike Matthews is from Georgia, yet he is not considering, apparently, Georgia, but SC and Clemson.
And Tennessee.
Any reason why Mike Matthews does not have an interest in Georgia, or is that just a perception but he really does have an interest, but it's just not considered, public knowledge? What's going on there?
I don't know. Honestly, I think it would be great to have Scott or Marshall on this show one time to answer a question like that.
And we should do that. You're right. Absolutely.
But it's an intriguing.
I saw a quote from him. I saw a quote from him this morning where he did in fact mention Georgia as a school that he's considering, and maybe he's not really. Maybe that's just the sort of thing you say to appease the hometown fans who are going to be angry with you. But look, I went away for college, and it's a pretty cool thing to do, to go to another part of the country and experience something that's a little bit different, to get away from home, and it doesn't really surprise me when kids are interested in going somewhere further away. I think a lot of times that's a really good thing to do to grow up.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. And no matter how much you say, I'm going to SC, you say you're from Florida or whatever, it still gets down to actually signing your name on a letter of intent, to actually make a commitment, as opposed to a commitment is more like a pledge. So that's why, even though these players are committing in June, there's a long way between June and actually saying, okay, dude, put your name on it, put your money where your mouth is, so to speak. So it'll be interesting to see if SC can keep all these players from out of state in the fold right through December. And again, the season could carry the momentum to that happening if SC really is able to survive the last 6 games and keep alive the positive vibes that are obviously here now. That'll make a difference. So with that, let's go to overtime. There's a lot of questions. Let's try to get through as many as we can. Some of them are holdover from the week before. A reminder, if you're interested in participating in the huddle, we'd love to have you. Just check the new members, the premium members board. There's generally a thread there that says, here's your chance to ask us some questions. We'll tell you what we know. It's our opinion. You don't have to agree with it, but this is how we think. Let's start off from MRB. He had 3 questions. If Alex Grinch's defense fails this year, what candidates would you be looking to interview to replace him? What style or alignment would you want to be installed by the new DC? This is an open forum. If anything comes to mind, just jump in right now, guys.
I feel like we've been down this road, so I'm just going to stick with let's see if it ever happens, if Alex Grinch is for whatever reason let go, hypothetically, Jim Leonard would be an ideal candidate. And I don't know, I'd like to see USC be a little bit more versatile, consider maybe a 4-3 that you can kind of disguise a little bit differently. Was there really a set alignment now anyways? Isn't everything kind of a hybrid?
Sure seems that way, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Chris, any thoughts on this?
No, I mean, look, Jim Leonard's obviously the name that everybody's talking about. You don't have any idea who's going to be available come December or January. So I'm not sure what to make of that. I'll also say that while I have criticized Grinch, and while I still have some reservations, he has not yet proven to me that he can't coach this defense, and he's going to be around this year. So I'm not as interested in talking about who we'll hire when he gets fired as I may have been, for example, when Clay Helton had been around for a number of years and I knew he was always going to be terrible. I was more than willing to talk about that all the time. Grinch hasn't yet fallen to that level in my eyes, so I don't want to talk about it that much.
Yeah, I also agree. I think after the emotion and stuff kind of calmed down after the Tulane loss, the bottom line is he's going to get another year. We all, I think, should hope he succeeds, which will be for the betterment of the team. Obviously, with the way SC's offense figures to roll. So let's hope he does succeed. We'll see. I tell you, one of the things that did catch my eye on one of the things I think Marcellus Williams talked about who just committed from St. John Bosco, the defensive back, is how he realized in his quotes, he said something along the lines, I'm paraphrasing, of course, is that, there was a lot of, let's say, talent deficiencies last year, and that they have confidence that it's about the players as much as it is the system. And if I go there, I think even Anthony Smith mentioned this as well, that they just need an upgrade. And, I want to be a part of that upgrade as opposed to go somewhere else where it's always in place. So, it seems to me that they're handling it, and the way the players that are being recruited are looking at it, it's all positive for the moment. So let's hope that, it's positive during the regular season. MRB also asks, excuse me, the expectations are extremely high this year, and most of that is because of Caleb Williams. What would you consider to be a failure as far as W's and L's? Does the end of the schedule throw any caution to your high expectations? I'll chip on this. It's almost like the feeling is, and maybe it's a reality, that it's either playoffs or bust, because this is probably the last year for Caleb Williams. But if I look in terms of W's and L's, I would be disappointed if their record isn't at least 10-2. I think if it isn't 10-2, that's not going to bode well. Probably means the defense didn't play well enough, but we'll see. And yes, the end of the schedule for me doesn't caution me in terms of high expectations of the team. But the reality of it is game by game a difficult task. The way it all works out. What do you guys think?
I'm where you are. Not making the playoffs would be a disappointment. It may be understandable in light of this schedule. I'm with you. I could see 2 losses in this schedule because the second half is so tough with these games stacked up one after another. And 10-2 would be a disappointment, but you could still be a really good football team with this schedule and go 10-2. So I will say this though, we talk about how difficult the schedule is, but you look at those 5 difficult teams in the last 6 games. Every single one of those teams has huge matchup problems against USC, right? They do. I mean, not a single one of them has any idea how to stop Caleb Williams. I mean, the only thing they can hope for is that he pops his hamstring, right? I mean, they're not going to stop him. He is going to score. And it's not just him. While that's one of the reasons for hope, that's an offense loaded with talent. That's an offense where mismatch makers like Deuce Robinson and Zachariah Branch, who are unbelievable talents, right? We're talking about guys who should be first round draft choices. Those guys are fighting to get on the field this year. That tells you something. That's a team that's going to cause problems for all of those other programs. And so while I am nervous about playing Oregon and UCLA back to back, playing Notre Dame and Utah back to back, those teams have some matchup problems they have to worry about, and USC is going to be in a position to beat all of them too. So there's no reason that we shouldn't expect playoff.
Yeah, let me just say, everyone, and Chris, you focused on the offense and you did it well, very eloquent. And everyone's focused on how difficult USC's schedule is this year. And no one's going to disagree that it's more difficult. I don't think anyone will disagree that last year, had USC's defense had this year's depth, they make the playoffs last year. So as challenging as the schedule should be, USC has fixed that issue that they had last year, and they added depth on defense. So I think that's the difference maker. So yeah, playoffs or bust. And for me, it's 11 wins. I understand the 10-2 because of the schedule and how it sets up. But because of the way the offense should play, and knowing or hoping the defense can use the scheme that Alex Grinch has developed teaching with just more players and better players, why should we be settling for less than 11 wins in a playoff break?
Well, I'll say, and I want to clarify what I said in terms of my 10-2.
No, I'm holding you to it, Greg.
If there's going to be two losses, okay, if there's going to be two
Holding
losses,
you to it, Greg. You stuck your foot in there. You're stuck.
no. I'm going to invoke the Kulkin rule. It gives me a chance to respond. No, I think the two losses to me, I don't want to say any loss is acceptable because the only thing you learn about losing is how to lose. But I think if the losses were at Notre Dame and Oregon, I could put it under a quote, understandable. I don't want to see any of the losses at home, like against UCLA or Washington. Home losses to me would be daggers to the season. So I hope that I hope that SC doesn't lose at Notre Dame because they could. Obviously Oregon because they could. And we'll see from there. Let's move on to the third question, which I think is an interesting one. Are USC's NILs now throwing money or promise money at recruits in order to get signatures, aka Oregon and Nike CAS $H, even though Lincoln Riley openly wanted no part of pay if you sign deals? How are we looking at that, guys?
I think they have their NIL game lined up, and they are introducing high school recruits to the people who will make sure that them and their families are well taken care of. We talked about it earlier in the show. Flying to games from out of state is a non-issue for families now. So to assume that USC isn't paying high school recruits, I don't know, maybe that's one way of looking at it. They're being taken care of. They're being more aggressive with the ones they need to be, the ones who have earned it. There's not very many Malachi Nelsons out there.
Yeah, I don't think they're doing what Oregon and Miami and Tennessee and some of these other programs have been doing. But I think Lincoln Riley's theory from the beginning is that LA is an economic powerhouse. And so if you can harness the power of LA and the deep ties that USC has in the business community in LA, that you could run NIL the way it's supposed to be run. You could legitimately match up players with opportunities, and that USC's players would do very well. And I think that's probably an appealing pitch to players once they see that it's working, right? If all of USC's players are doing very well in NIL, I don't know that you have to tell a guy, you're going to get $100,000 if you sign your name here. Right. Because they know that the guys are making $100,000 that are in their position, and there will be some trust there. So I think USC can do it. It's going to take a little bit of time to show that the NIL plan is working. But it sounds like the recruits right now are liking what they're hearing, and so I think USC is going to be okay in NIL. And by the way, what happens in some of those other programs is a little bit dangerous. I mean, not only because you could have a meltdown the way Jimbo Fisher did, but if you're relying on one guy to give a lot of money to your program in order to pay for all of your recruits, that one guy has an immense amount of power at that program, right? I mean, if you're the guy at Miami that's writing the checks to land these guys, you are effectively calling the shots. You're the one that gets to decide which players you're going to recruit. You're certainly going to have a great deal of say in who's playing, because if I'm writing a check for $100,000 every year for a kid and he's sitting on the bench, I'm going to be unhappy. So what Lincoln Riley is trying to avoid, I think, is something that he should try to avoid. And so I think USC's NIL plan is going to work, and it may already be getting some traction.
Yeah, I think Lincoln Riley actually has a pretty good handle on this now. Yeah. I think he knows what he wants to do, what he doesn't want to do. I think he's found out from previous recruits, even those that he has lost, where the focus should be. And if it goes along with his philosophy, I don't know. From what I understand, the presentation of NIL and that sort of stuff really went over big with recruits. They totally get it. He wants the type of player that's going to have character. He doesn't want a player that would only want to go to SC for money. It's way beyond that. And I support him 4,000%. So he seems to have it all together. All right, let's move to question 2. I think.
Oh, by the way, can I say one more thing on that before?
Please do.
It wasn't an accident that Nick Saban mentioned USC when he was complaining about NIL a few weeks ago. One, because USC is going to scare Alabama alums into writing checks in a way that a lot of other programs won't. But also because I think Saban also realizes what Riley realizes about the economic potential of Los Angeles, which you do not have in Tuscaloosa. And so I don't think it's an accident. I think Nick Saban's looking at it, and I think he genuinely is concerned about USC NIL and recruiting, not because they're writing checks for signatures the way programs have been, but he's just looking at it saying, we don't have that kind of money. We don't have those resources in Alabama, and that's a problem for me.
A different angle on that is they have to take the risk of recruit. Nick Saban has to come out to California, recruit the top players, bring them back to Alabama, and retain them, and hoping that the players that they paid to come out there the first time stay there, and not say, you know what, the culture out here is just a little bit too weird, I'm going home. That's where USC is taking advantage of this game right now.
Well, you know, I saw a video last night that was on YouTube. It was a video of right after spring ball, I guess at the kind of a meet and greet thing where Lincoln Riley was the guest speaker. And he again emphasized this point. USC and Southern California is not for everybody. And that is a big deal to me. We've all been around the country enough times to know that there's something really different about Southern California in terms of all facets, culture, et cetera, et cetera. And, you know, when I see a player from out of state and I read the quotes about certain things, like one of the players says, and the beaches. And I keep saying, you know, that's like what Chris is kind of mentioning. There's factors that Nick Saban knows he can't battle, you know, a yacht cruise on Marina Del Rey, or, you know, having your own beach blanket with your name on it and you're out there at the beach, whatever. And that is a real challenge that none of these teams, and they know it, you know it, I know it. Objective recruiting people that watch it know it. You cannot. SC's got so many advantages, and to be honest with you, like Pete Carroll, Lincoln Riley knows how to push those buttons and go there and take full advantage of it. Question 2 from Romy in Huntington Beach. I think we touched on this, so no link to discussion needed. What is an estimate of number of commitments secured by USC coaches from this week's Trojans picnic? I believe identify 5. I think I said something around 7, 8, could be more. Anybody want to just chip in a number?
if they bat 500, it's a win. I mean, it doesn't. 5 is the low number, which is that's where I would go.
All right, let's go to question 3 from Tailback U in Orange County. Who is your must-get recruit this cycle and why? I'm going to stick my neck out on this one. I think it's the linebacker from St. John Bosco, Williamu Asa. I think this is a must-get recruit. And when we saw a must-get recruit, I'm saying a guy they actually could get. Not somebody who I think is going to, Alabama that we have no chance over, but starting locally, and even because he is a national recruit, I think Asa is just, if they can get him to go to USC, that is a major thing. And I think that the signing or commitment by Williams could go also a long way in getting Asa to maybe tone it down in his mind about Notre Dame and maybe Ohio State. So for me, that's the guy must get recruit. How do you guys feel about it?
I don't believe there's any such thing as a must get recruit. I just don't think there are guys who are program changers. Mike Vick was a program changer for Virginia Tech. You might say that he was a must get recruit, but I don't think USC ever has one. I mean, Lorenzo Booker was a must get recruit. We didn't get him. Reggie Bush showed up the next year. If Reggie Bush didn't show up, there's a decent chance Adrian Peterson might have. I'm just saying that I don't think USC has must get recruits. It's a program that recruits too many good players and is too compelling. If you don't get a Dylan Raiola, you will get somebody who is elite anyway. I just think that's the way it works at USC. So I don't buy into the theory.
Mark?
Just from this perspective, USC is trying to prove to the college football world, to recruits, to specific programs, yeah, we can develop you and we can get you to the NFL. So they're now showing them statistics, comparing USC to other programs who might be selling themselves better than USC. So as far as must have, to your point, Greg, yeah, Kingston Viliamu-Asa is a must get. So it shows other defensive players out there who are like, I want to go to USC, but I'm not sure yet. When you get those marquee players jumping on board, it gives confidence to other players to do it. So a local player, yeah, you want a Kingston Viliamu-Asa. You want him to say, you know what, if my buddy Marcellus Williams is willing to do it, I'm going to do it. And then my buddy Peyton Woodyard, he's going to flip from Georgia and he's going to stick at home as well. And then that just shows players like Edric Houston, who is what I would consider an impact game-changing type of player, to say, you know what, that's a must get. So I understand where Chris is coming from. I just look at it, and he wouldn't disagree. I'm coming at it from a little bit more of a nuanced look at it, as far as must get, as opposed to USC cannot lose that player type of thing.
All right, from Trojans 2021 in Chicago. If you had Annie Hansen's job of planning official visits, what is the one restaurant in LA you would take recruits to? For me, it would be Maestro's Steakhouse. They would commit after having the butter cake. I don't know if a restaurant has an impact anymore, because it seems to me that the best restaurant you could have would be Lincoln Riley's house, overlooking the Pacific Ocean in Palos Verdes Estates and the Luau. That seems to be doing a great job. But I remember the one restaurant that I thought really did make an impact, having been there a number of times, was the Papadakis Taverna in San Pedro. The belly dancers, the excitement, the energy. 1 year, Pete Carroll, I think, made a surprise visit one time for another USC deal. But Petros Papadakis, or his father's, John's restaurant in San Pedro, was definitely a recruiting advantage, and was actually the focus of NCAA investigations, so to speak. So that's kind of my thought on this particular question. Anything you guys want to add?
No.
Okay, let's
I
move.
don't think they're even eating at restaurants at this point. I think they have them. I think they have them stacked up, and the food is catered. I think I read that. So
Maybe take them all to Laurie's and let them have their own little mini beef bowl against each other. See who can eat them.
you know what? Hey, you know what? I'll plug this. My daughter works at Mother Wolf, which may be the hottest restaurant in LA right now. They have celebrities in there all the time. So maybe Mother Wolf, but really, no, I don't think it matters. That's not going to sell a recruit.
All right, this is from Trojans in the Valley. Hey, panel, we often hear about players and coaches watching game film. Can you describe the process? Where do they watch the film? Is there a dedicated film room? What are they focusing on when watching? Do they use any 3D or augmented reality? How do players and coaches use that knowledge to get better? Okay.
Chris?
You take this one.
Well, I can't tell you what the USC players are doing right now and the technology they use because I don't know. The question, how do players use it to get better? So let's say you're playing defensive back, watching film of the quarterback and the wide receivers on the other side may help tip you off to various things. Guys may line up in a certain place only if they're running a particular type of route. You may be able to key on the fact that that even though you would like your routes to look exactly the same for your first 3 or 4 steps, if you can do it, then maybe guys don't do that. Maybe you can see something about the way a quarterback plays. I mean, that's part of it. You're trying to see something on film that you will then recognize in the game that will give you an advantage. That's one example of the way you can use film.
Mark, anything to add on this?
No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't. This is Chris's lane.
Yeah, well, I tell you, I've kind of been in that situation. You break down film, but in this day and age, with so much 7-on-7 work and lineman stuff, competition, if you send people out there that you respect, or yourself as a recruiter can go out there and watch it, you can see how far advanced players are as athletically, how fundamentally sound they are. You can see, do they put forth effort every rep? There's a lot of things you can do, and yes, they do have a film room. Most places I know, hey, look at high schools have their own film room, in some of the really big time programs. So it's a process, and you come, and then it's far beyond that, way far beyond that, because then you would add knowledge of the player's character, et cetera, et cetera. But you get some stuff off the film, but it's great to see them in person. Question 6 from James, USC. I've heard on multiple occasions there have been changes made to the defense. What do you guys think of those changes? I can honestly say I don't know how many changes they're making other than maybe personnel changes of position. Any thoughts?
Yeah, we've heard there's been some tweaks to the scheme here and there. Obviously, it didn't really show itself during the spring game, so I guess we're going to have to find out in the fall. But yeah, I mean, the defensive staff had they came together and they know that they had to make some adjustments. We're going to find out what it is. We know they're doing some stuff personnel-wise. Corey Foreman is no longer a rush end. They determined he's going to put his hand in the dirt and play defensive end. So we'll see what kind of scheme adjustments they made.
All right.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Chris.
my criticism of Alex Grinch has been that sometimes he does things schematically that put players in difficult positions and give them assignments that are very hard to fulfill. Maybe because he's trying to apply pressure at one spot that he's putting a defensive back in a very difficult spot somewhere else. That's been my primary criticism of him. But part of the reason he may do that is because he realized he did not have the talent he needed, and so he's trying to engineer things. And so we'll see. But the most important change USC can make is get better defensive players, because the talent on the defense last year was not up to USC standards. So if they solve that problem, then every scheme looks better.
remember, we're talking about guys who started last year that might not be starters this year. That's how much the roster has changed.
All right, question 7, just a couple more here and then we'll be done. From JCW USC in Palm Desert. In the new facility plans for the football team, it is noted that the facility will include a, quote, recovery hub. What exactly is a recovery hub?
It's a room full of ice bath. It's holistic medicine stuff. It's, again, it's ice baths, it's showers, it's massage rooms, it's aromatherapy, it's everything that players need to recover after a long day of practice or playing in the game.
This is one area where technology has really made huge leaps forward in recent years, and it's hugely important. And I didn't realize how important it was until I got into my 40s, at which point it became clear that recovery is actually difficult. But when you think about it, if you're trying to get through summer camp leading up to your first game, you're going to have guys that are dinged up. You're going to have guys that are sore. You want to keep them on the field, but even if you get them on the field, if they're beat up and they can't perform close to 100%, you're losing something. So I think USC is taking advantage of some of the medical resources and knowledge that we didn't have before to get guys where they're as close to healthy as possible, so that they can get better every day.
All right, let's finish up here with the final question from Scott in Gilbert, Arizona. Hi, panel. With the number of high school kids committing, committing in far greater numbers to the 2024 class, do you see the coaching staff reserving some spots for transfers at the end of the 2023 season, or do you see us taking a full class of 25 high school players for the class of 2024? Comment?
I think you get every elite player you can get as soon as you can get them. There will always be an opportunity to make room on the roster for talented transfers, because on any team, you're going to have some guys who don't pan out or who aren't happy with their role, or who aren't going to be able to make it up on the depth chart. And you have some honest conversations with those guys. So I don't see any reason to, I don't think you take questionable players. But if you can sign an elite guy, you sign them. You can worry about making room for a transfer later.
Mark, any thoughts on this?
No, there's nothing really left to say on that one. It's such a fluid thing. And look, I go back to what just happened. USC brought in a transfer in Traquan Fagans late after spring. Player you considered, part of the rotation. Latrell McCutcheon said, "I'm out." Eventually, players are going, the players will call themselves. Sometimes you don't even need the coach to do it.
Yeah, I think in this day and age, especially with the transfer portal, I think Lincoln Riley, I think he has said this before, he's not going to just take players to take players. He's not going to fill up the class of 2024 with, let's just say, 25 players. He's not going to do that. And when he doesn't do that, that obviously gives him a great deal of flexibility. I think he has a pretty good idea of a master plan where, look at this. This is the level that we're going to go to, and then we can cut it off here. Like Chris mentioned, if they're all superstar players, he's gonna be able to get them in. And I think, as Mark just mentioned, there's always going to be a spot open. But it is a little bit of a balancing act. So far, they've done it. To me, they've done a super job of dealing with it. And I think if they continue to get the great high school players that it appears they're going to be getting in the future, they're just going to kind of a sliding scale. It's going to be a fluid situation. So, all right, guys, great job. A reminder, if you have questions or comments for our panel, go to the WeAreSC member message board, click on the thread that pertains to Inside the Trojans Huddle, view our listener questions. That'll do it for this Tuesday's edition of Inside the Trojans Huddle. Till next Tuesday, a big thank you to our panelists, Mark Kulkin and Chris Arledge, who was on a remote. And a special big thank you to all of you for watching or listening to Inside the Trojans Huddle. Have yourself a great week. And until then, this is your moderator, Greg Katz reminding you all to fight on, everybody.